Hello, my name is Dr. Liz Angoff, and I am so excited to be able to talk to you about how we help kids understand their amazing brains. So, after a child has been through an assessment process, you've gotten so much information as their parent about how their brain works, what's going to be most helpful for them, and if we have a name for how we explain their brain. And that name is the diagnosis. And often parents are just really at a, I kind of, it's really hard. They're struggling with, I want my child to understand how their brain works, but do I use these words? And how do I explain these things to my child, especially when it's hard for me to process and fully understand, and I'm still learning. So I'm going to introduce some ideas today about why it's so important that kids know how their brain works and that they understand their diagnosis, if not the official term, at least how they process information. And then we're going to talk about how we introduce that language and continue the conversation over the years to come. Because there is no child who will understand everything about their brain in one go, which is great for us because there's no way we'd be able to explain everything in one go. So we want to make sure that this is a conversation that we can start and evolve over time. So let's get into it. So talking to kids about their differences can be scary. And when I talk to parents, the things that come up are so similar for every family that I talk to, wanting to know when is the right time, if they're even going to understand, especially what it's going to do to their self-esteem. And then for me as a parent, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I mess it up? The thing is, though, that kids already know something is different about them. They just don't know why. And when we know something's different, but we don't know why, we start to create our own narratives about why things are hard. And unfortunately, these narratives are often very negative and really harmful to our kids, and they stick around for a long time. And so this may be familiar to you if you're an adult who is diagnosed later in life, or just even came to understand yourself later in life. And so when we're talking to kids, our goal is really to help them shift this self-narrative from whatever version of I'm broken that they're carrying around to I'm built differently. And not only am I built differently, but the way that I'm built is pretty awesome. And so I'm going to be introducing to you some language that is going to help you to have this conversation with your child. And there is a script for this that you can download off of explainingbrains.com/script. And we'll revisit this handout later in the talk. So step one, the first part of this conversation is actually understanding how your child understands what's hard for them. And so we go in for an assessment because there's a problem. Something is hard. And it's really important that we know how to describe that as parents so that we can get help for our child. But when we're thinking about how we're going to explain all this to the child, we want to start with their words. So we want to know, how do they understand what's going on? And I will tell you, I've learned over time that the words that we use as adults to explain these things can be very different than the way that kids understand or talk about these things. So for an example, as adults, we might go in saying there's a problem, they can't pay attention. But kids might describe it as it's so boring. So the problem that we want to help them solve is the boring problem, not the attention problem. Or the child might say, other people are distracting me. So we want to help them with the distraction problem. As adults, we might be concerned because kids are not doing their homework, they're refusing, they're having big explosive reactions. But for a child, the problem might actually be that the homework takes too long. So we want to help them solve the homework takes too long problem. We might see things like they're struggling with transitions, but for kids, the issue might be everybody's always rushing me. So we want to help them solve the rushing problem and help them understand why that's so hard. A lot of times as adults will say they procrastinate, they never get things done, then they're all stressed out. But what is the kids' version of the problem? No problem. I get it done just in time. Or more realistically, the problem is that adults are always nagging me. So we still have a problem to solve. It's the nagging problem. Or how to get things done without all the stress that it can create. So when we think about our kids' words, it becomes a lot easier to start this conversation. So the way we're going to start the conversation of helping them to understand their diagnosis is with the problem that they are interested in solving. So it may sound something like this. You know how you were saying that we're always nagging you about your homework? You know how you were saying that you feel like everybody's always rushing you? Well, I learned some things that might help us understand why that's been so tricky. Or remember when you worked with that person who did all those different activities and puzzles with you? Turns out that that person helped us understand why this has been so tricky. Can I share with you what I learned? And I want to put just a small emphasis on this last thing, that asking permission to share this information can really help with the conversation. It's really vulnerable to kids. I'm about to share with you something that's pretty serious. We're having a conversation. Maybe we're having the conversation over ice cream or on a walk, but I got something to tell you. So I want to make sure you're ready. 99.9% of the time, just asking permission means that the child's going to say, okay, yes, because it's giving them control to close that door if they want to at any point. And if they say no, then you can say, great. Thank you for letting me know. I'd love to share this with you at some time. Let me know, or I'll ask again in a couple of days. But let's say that they said, okay, I'm curious. What do you have to say? So the way that I like to introduce brains to kids is by a metaphor about construction. And our brains are these amazing instruments we have in our heads, but they are constantly under construction, even as adults. And so it may sound something like this. Well, I learned that your brain works by sending messages from one part to another using these special cells called neurons. And neurons are super cool because they connect to each other and they make these pathways in our brain, like billions of tiny roads. And you have a ton of these roads in your brain. And in fact, some things are easy for your brain, and we can think of these as your highways. So these roads, one of the things that we discovered or I learned about your brain is that you have a tremendous number of highways. Can you think of some of your highways? Maybe you like to draw. Maybe Minecraft, maybe playing a sport, maybe math is your superpower. What are some things that you enjoy doing or things that come easily to you? And then I might say, here are a few that I thought of, or here are a few that I learned from the person that you worked with. And I'll introduce to you some of the things that might come up. So these are some common diagnoses that kids may have, although they don't need a diagnosis to explain their brain. It may just be their strengths. So, kids who have ADHD brains are often really good at coming up with ideas. They might be really skillful at remembering stories and experiences. A lot of ADHDers do better as things get harder. Making people laugh can be a great highway. Maybe jumping into new experiences is one of their highways, or focusing intensely when they really enjoy something. Similarly, autistic kids have a lot of highways like deep and passionate interests. They might be truthful and trustworthy. They may thrive with routines or when things are consistent. They might enjoy movement or other sensory experiences. They might notice things that other people don't notice. Kids who have really high anxiety often hold high expectations for themselves. They're very attentive to details. They have a lot of empathy for others. They're awesome in crisis or when other people need help. They tend to be very curious and they might be more observant before diving in. Or even kids with behavioral challenges have a lot of really common highways. They may have a passion for social justice. They may be excellent leaders and very determined. They may feel things very deep, both the happiness and some of those more intense feelings. Um, they may be very perceptive and knowledgeable about things, and they tend to be defenders of the marginalized or bullied because maybe they've experienced some of that on their own. Now, just telling kids about their highways is a great start, but kids know something is different and they feel that something's hard. And when we only tell them about their highways, there's a part of them that often is saying, but why did I have to go to that special person? So introducing this idea of your brain has all these roads and there are these parts that are under construction. And so some things are more challenging. We can think of these as your construction zones or your construction projects, the skills that you're building. Can you think of some things that your brain has been working on? Maybe these are some things that your brain was working on in the past and you've completed those construction projects. And now we can talk about the next construction project. In fact, if your child is like, I don't know, nothing's hard, when you do this, you might take a step back and say, let's think of some things that used to be hard that aren't hard anymore. What are some of your completed construction projects? Like when you were a baby, you didn't know how to walk and now you know how to walk. When you were in kindergarten, you didn't know how to read and now you read. When you were in second grade, you were running all over the field in soccer, and now you scored 3 goals this season. And then you can talk about the next construction project. And if they might have some to add, or you might introduce maybe 1 or 2 that aren't going to be a surprise. And these construction zones are going to be in their words. So, a construction project is, finishing your work before we start to nag you, or without stress. Or it might be like one of the construction projects is figuring out what to do when kids distract you. So some common construction zones for ADHD brains in, kind of the language that kids might use is waiting to share your awesome ideas, writing those ideas down on paper, staying focused on boring or easy things, getting started on your work, maybe keeping things organized as a construction project, or moving and fidgeting without disrupting others. So moving and fidgeting is not a bad thing. In fact, you might need that for your brain. But doing that in a way that's works with the full community may be something that is a construction project. Autistic kids also have construction zones that they are working on. So finding friends you can connect with may be something that's harder. And I want to be really careful here that when you have a neurodivergent brain, whether you have an ADHD brain, autistic brain, an anxious brain, social justice minded brain, that there's nothing wrong with your brain, but the way you do things may be different. And so we want to make sure we're supporting that by using language that is going to be really positive. And a lot of autistic kids, it's hard for them to find their friends. And so this might be something that we're working on. Writing down your ideas can be hard for autistic brains. Knowing what to do when things change or are unpredictable can be very challenging. So having a strategy might be something that we're building. Navigating the crazy hallways during passing period was one that came up for a child that I worked with. Kids who are wired more anxiously may have difficulty paying attention. They may be working on strategies for adjusting to change. They may need help building their ability to break things down into smaller parts or do something new. They might need help knowing how to respond in the moment, especially when they need more time to process something. So what to do in that moment so that they can have more time. And then kids who have behavioral challenges, again, whether it's tied to a specific diagnosis or not, they might need help expressing their needs in the moment. They may have difficulties with sensory overwhelm, or they may need to, build their ability to identify when their senses are overwhelmed. They may react before they've had time to think through. They may be building their ability to notice those body cues or shift from one plan to another if their first plan is not going right, and so forth. So we can usually, when we're talking about construction zones, while I love to list lots of highways, I might choose one or two things that a child can really resonate with that may be under construction or their next construction project. And for some kids, it's just one thing. And again, at the beginning of this talk, I mentioned we're setting ourselves up for an ongoing conversation because we want to make sure that kids can really process, and they may need to process things one small piece at a time. All right, so now we have highways and construction zones, and we can actually put those together to develop a definition of their own unique neurodivergent profile using the language that we just identified. So this is the sentence frame that I love using to help kids understand what their diagnosis means for them. So we're not trying to give them the textbook definition of the diagnosis. We're trying to give them a meaningful definition of their diagnosis. So it may be if for whatever reason we're not ready to share the actual term with them, and for some diagnoses, the actual term is not something we want to share with a young child because there's just, it comes from a medical model and it just might not feel right. Or maybe as a parent, you're not ready yet, and that is okay. That doesn't mean we have to wait to start this conversation. Starting the conversation is very, very important. But kids are, sometimes the diagnosis is, a kind of, a preliminary diagnosis, and we might not want to share it just yet. Or sometimes we might not know yet. When kids are young, they're changing all the time, and you might have gotten something from a professional and said, well, we're going to monitor over time. But we can still use this powerful word, neurodiversity. So for you, neurodiversity means your brain is built in a way that makes your highways come easily and your construction zones much more difficult. So it might sound like this. For me, neurodiversity means my brain works best when I'm moving, and it's hard for me when I have to sit still. Or thinking about other highways and construction zones that we talked about, in the earlier slides. For you, neurodiversity means that you are very passionate and really fight for others when they're being mistreated, but it can be hard to think through think through things before reacting sometimes. And then if it's time to share a specific diagnosis with a child, we can do the same thing. So for you, your diagnosis means that your brain is built in a way that makes your highways come easily and your construction zones more difficult. So here are a few examples. For me, being autistic means my brain likes rules, but has a hard time when they change. For me, ADHD means I'm good at organizing people, but bad at organizing things. For me, anxiety means my brain works best when I have time to shift gears, and it's harder when I feel surprised. Or maybe just my brain works best when I feel safe. So these definitions are so important to kids. Just having a way to talk about my brain becomes really, really critical, because when kids know why they're getting support, they're more likely to benefit from it. When they know why their brain works the way they do, the way it does, they're more likely to be successful and to not be carrying around those harmful negative narratives. And as I mentioned before, we do have this script that's available at explainingbrains.com. And you can see that there's a place to put in your child's concerns for the introduction of your conversation. There's a little explanation of what it means for your brain to be under construction. And then you can fill this out ahead of time with some of the highways you thought of, and there's a space for construction zones. So this can be your cheat sheet when you're talking to your child about the different things that are strengths for them and the things that they may be working on. Now, I have mentioned a few times that we're setting ourselves up for continued conversations. Learning is not a one-time thing. It's not an event that we attend. It's a journey, especially when we're learning about ourselves. And so, for kids, I think it's really important that we think about introducing things one tiny bit at a time and just moving them kind of one more step along their journey or one more page in their story. And so some ways we can do that is to integrate the brain building language into our daily conversation. So it might be like, wow, you did something new. You built a new road today. Or, I wonder if this skill is still under construction. How can I help? When they get frustrated, whether it's with homework or trying to button their jacket, or even, trying to get a new level in a video game. Or when they are doing something that it comes really easily to them, we might say, this seems to be one of your highways. Or, this road isn't getting us there. Can we try a different route? Which might be a way to help in moments when frustration is starting to creep on. And the more that we use this kind of language, the more the kids start talking about their own brains as having these real strengths and then being in progress. And it helps make that narrative, even when we're frustrated, positive and helpful. Okay, I have something new that I'm building. Not there's something wrong with me or I can't. Now, to do this, I have a spreadsheet of videos, visuals. There are books that are on here, and it's on explainingbrains.com/parents. And you can see that down here, there's going to be a tab for all the different common diagnoses that you might find, and they keep going. And as I find new resources that I find helpful for kids, I put them here. And there's a link to them and then some notes for the description of who you might use this with and who it's most appropriate for. So you can see recommended for older children, best for younger elementary, and some different things that can be helpful. And you can use these, throughout their childhood. For kids who have, who may be neurodivergent or learning about their profile, but we don't have a name for it yet, this is a wonderful video that I would love to just show you right now.
What is neurodiversity? We all have unique brains that make each of us special, with our own things that we are great at, like noticing small details others don't see, and some things that are harder for us, like calming ourselves when we get excited, mad, or worried. Neurodiversity celebrates all of those differences. We need all kinds of brains to make this world a better place. Some people are more alike than others. Some differences in thinking have been given names, like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's, and others. While they bring some challenges, they also bring important gifts. Neurodiversity makes the world beautiful. We all need to help each other and celebrate each of our strengths. Together, we will reach new heights and everyone can soar.
We also have, when kids are diagnosed with ADHD, I love this video. This is Jessica McCabe from the How to ADHD channel. This video is called My 10 Favorite Things About Having ADHD. And it is a fabulous video to watch with your ADHDer, because she calls out so many of the amazing things that come with an ADHD brain, but she also acknowledges that it's hard to have an ADHD brain. And so it does a really good job of walking through both. And then because there's a lot of, families of autistic children who really want to know how to talk to their child, this one is a really good one. And I have had such success showing this to kids. It was made by autistic individuals, and there's something about it that just really speaks to the young people that I work with, and it's appropriate through high school, even young adult, which is great. There are so many more videos and comics and books to really help keep this conversation going. So thank you so much for viewing this video. I hope that it's been helpful. You can learn more at explainingbrains.com/parents. Follow along on Explaining Brains, at Explaining Brains on Instagram, or feel free to email me if you have any questions at all at liz@drlizangoff.com. I am just so excited for how we are changing the way that we think about and talk about neurodivergence with our children. So thank you so much for everything you're doing to support our kids and their amazing brains.